Hello and welcome to Spotlight. I'm Marcia Hashimi. Thanks so much for being with us. Well, it appears that more and more some Western politicians are showing their true colors. Some former and current high-ranking officials have come out and are openly supporting terrorism against an independent country, Iran. The Mujahideen Khalq terror organization has killed at least 12,000 Iranians, but that doesn't seem to matter, as the goal for these MKO supporters seem to be increased pressure on regular Iranians, as well as overthrowing the Islamic establishment in Tehran and supporting any entity willing to try to do that, even terrorists. So the question is it just the MEK with blood on its hands? Are these Western countries also complicit in the mass murder of Iranians?
This is the annual meeting of the MKO terrorist group being hosted by Albania. Due to the coronavirus, the meeting is both virtual and face-to-face. Every year, the event brings together delegates paid by the terror group. This year, several high-profile Western politicians, including Slovenian Prime Minister Janez Janša, a number of U.S. lawmakers, as well as former Secretary of State Mike Pompeo, are among invitees.
The program of sanctions and pressure employed by the Trump administration needs to remain the model for engagement with Iran if we want to ensure the security of the American people and better lives for the Iranian people. In Washington, D.C., there is much consensus, as evidenced by the overwhelming support for the sanctions regime that we put into place.
Tehran has slammed the Western countries for supporting the group. The Iranian Foreign Ministry spokesman said the MKO is a terrorist cult having the blood of Iranian people on its hands. Saeed Khatibzadeh denounced Western politicians, including Pompeo, for, quote, selling themselves to the Europe-hosted circus. He also accused the West of a shameful hypocrisy driven by insatiable thirst for money and anti-Iran obsession. Iran has also summoned Slovenia's ambassador in Tehran to strongly protest against the participation of the country's premier in the meeting. The ministry said supporting a terrorist group violates the UN Charter and international norms. The Mujahideen Khalq organization was founded in the 1960s. The group started the blind assassination campaign of Iranian citizens and officials after the 1979 Islamic Revolution. They also conducted dozens of bombings across the country. Out of the nearly 17,000 Iranians killed in different terrorist attacks over the past 4 decades, about 12,000 of them have fallen victim to the MKO. During a war launched against Iran by former Iraqi dictator Saddam Hussein, the 1980s, MKO members were armed by the then Iraqi regime to fight alongside Ba'athist forces against the Islamic Republic. Despite all the crimes committed by the MKO, it's not currently listed by any Western country as a terrorist organization. The European Union and the US, that often claim to be anti-terrorism, rather removed the MKO from their list of terror organizations in 2009 and 2012, respectively. Ever since the West has changed its stance toward the MKO, propagating it not only as an Iranian opposition group, but misses no chance to fund the group and lobby in its favor by putting a blind eye to how the MKO spilled the blood of innocent people. This exposes the West's double standards when it comes to terrorist organizations.
Well, I'd like to welcome my guests to this program. Out of London, Dr. Marcus Papadopoulos, historian and analyst, and out of Tehran, Mustafa Khoshesh, journalist and political commentator. Thank you both for being with us. I'd like to start this off with Marcus in London. Your perspective, I mean, why would former and current Western political officials even participate in a meeting sponsored by a group which has killed so many people?
That America and other Western countries, such as Britain, have a long history of supporting terror groups is a well-known and well-established actuality in international affairs, and I should also add, a completely irrefutable actuality. However, what I find particularly alarming about America's increasing links to the terrorist organization MKO is the parallel which I can draw with America's links to another diabolical terrorist organization, namely the so-called Kosovo Liberation Army. Now, please allow me to explain the parallel. America long coveted Kosovo and Metohija, as America has coveted Iran since the Iranian Revolution of 1979. America once designated the KLA as a terrorist organization, as America also once designated MKO as a terrorist organization. However, American policymakers came to understand that in order to achieve America's objective of securing Kosovo and Metohija for itself and its other Western allies, the KLA could no longer be designated as a terrorist group, and therefore the KLA began its brutal campaign in Kosovo and Metohija. Now, the Americans, a number of years ago, took the decision to no longer designate MKO as a terrorist organization. We know what happened with the KLA. The KLA was free to advance its terror campaign in the Serbian province, which of course provided NATO with a pretext to bombard what was then the Federal Republic of Yugoslavia. Now that the Americans are increasing their links to MKO, indeed they have established a terrorist training base in Albania for MKO. Albania is, of course, a client state of America. My concern is that whilst I'm not saying that MKO will carry out a campaign in Iran, as the KLA did in Kosovo and Metohija, undoubtedly MKO will at some point increase its terrorist attacks in Iran. And who is to say that that would not provide the Americans and other Western countries, most notably Britain, with a pretext to take some sort of action against Iran? Maybe not military action, but some sort of other action. So that is why.
All right, stay with me, Marcus. Stay with me, Marcus. It's a very quick show. Let me get Mostafa in on this discussion. What about that, Mostafa? I mean, do you think that the MKO are really that effective to be able to make a difference inside of Iran, as Marcus has just said, or even to try? It appears that they have tried everything that they could over the last 42 years and have not been successful. But how do you see it?
Hello, Marcia. Thanks for having me.
Thanks for coming.
You know, first of all, former and retired American officials would take part in such gatherings in return for huge sums, especially if they pay you from $20,000 to $120,000 in the case of Rudy Giuliani, and which, of course, and he was given a private flight and the best accommodation. But when it comes to the MKO, it's a completely different case, because they are being used as an instrument in two aspects. Actually, they are being used. One is as an instrument to pressure Tehran. They were taken off the blacklist back in 2012 when Hillary Clinton was Secretary of State, and the Obama administration was preparing to maximize pressures for the impact of the cruel sanctions, or in the terms of Obama, he said, crippling sanctions, in order to pressure Tehran into talks. Now, the same happened after Donald Trump and Bolton intended to maximize the pressures on Iran after the pullout from the JCPOA in 2018. And now the same is being done by the Biden administration because of the current conditions. There is not much hope about the Vienna talks. Both sides are trying to beat each other and receive more concessions for a revival of the nuclear deal. Also, Biden knows that Raisi is in office, and he would not agree to regional talks with the United States over Iran's regional power and missile power. So they intend to maximize pressures on Iran. This is not the only case that the U.S. is using terrorist groups as an instrument for imposing its will. As my colleague said, the other parallel is when the U.S. supported the ISIS terrorist group. And also, let's remember that there has been, much confession by former and present U.S. officials, including Joe Biden himself, that they and their allies supported the creation of this ISIS terrorist groups. And let's remember that the MKO, MEK, whatever they are called, these terrorists, oldies, the cult, they, trained not only ISIS, but especially the al-Nusra, another offshoot of the Al-Qaeda in Syria, as well as Jaish al-Islam, another terrorist offshoot of Al-Qaeda, which operated in East Ghouta of Damascus in the early years of the war, the militancy war in Syria. They trained them, and there are facts, and there have been facts that have been released on international media outlets about the training by the MKO.
So basically, Mustafa, what you're saying, let me just jump in here for a second. So basically what you're saying is that these Western governments, these Western regimes are basically, they're willing to use these terrorist groups just to get to their goal. In this case, perhaps the overthrow of the Islamic Republic. Is that what you're saying?
No, true, but using the MKO and many other terrorist groups is done by the United States as not just for, this instrumental use is not just aimed at increasing political pressures, but they've been a very, practical and very good tool in the hands of the United States for espionage, for assassination of Iranian nuclear scientists. And even the Western media outlets have been acknowledging that the MKO has been running cooperation with the CIA and especially Mossad in order to do the assassination when it comes to Iran, especially in the case of Iranian nuclear scientists.
Okay. Stay with me, Mustafa. I'm so sorry to interrupt you. So sorry. But let me get Marcus back in on this discussion. Marcus, when we look at the situation, obviously this is a group with lots of money. Now, we have various analysts pointing the fingers at Riyadh and Saudi Arabia as far as backing them. Your overall assessment of where this terrorist group is getting their financial support?
Well, Marcia, where would American foreign policy objectives, indeed where would British foreign policy objectives be without terror groups? Both Washington and London have long employed terrorist organizations to advance the goals of America and Britain in various parts of the world, from Bosnia to Libya to Syria. Though, of course, in the latter case, namely Syria, the American objective was defeated. But nonetheless, without the support of America and Britain, both ISIS and Al-Qaeda could never have become the potent force in Syria that both groups managed to achieve. And the same with MKO. MKO has been groomed by the Americans and other Western countries for a number of years now, indeed for many decades now. They have not just been lavished with money, but also top American lobby groups, top American PR firms have created the image of the MKO as a democratic and peace-loving organization. One need only look at the footage of MKO conferences, both this year's one and in previous year's one, to see how it is very slick. The men, largely speaking, are well-groomed, and many of them are wearing suits, and indeed their female counterparts are also well-groomed. That is how the Americans and also the British in public project the terrorist leadership, the leadership of the numerous terrorist groups to the rest of the world, whom America and Britain are supporting. However, what you see at MKO conferences is just a facade. It is merely a cover, because the reality of MKO is that it is a violent, bloodthirsty terrorist organization which has been persecuting a savage war against the Iranian people, men, women, and children, for many, many years now.
Okay.
And my concern, as I said moments ago, is that MKO could grow into something more potent, far more potent than what it has been in previous years.
Well, Mustafa, I mean, when we look at the situation, as Marcus was saying, their presentation and the way that we see the media showing them, or their live coverage, very slick, very coordinated, and very much a Western type setup when they're trying to promote certain groups. So with this being said, and we know the terrorist activities that the MKO, MEK has taken part in, and we do not see this organization being listed not by Europe or not by the United States on a terror list. So where does the United Nations play in all of this? Where does that come in? Does this actually delegitimize the United Nations itself for basically just turning a blind eye to this terrorist group? But at the same time, we have seen so many sanctions on so many other countries or entities, for example, like Iran, like Russia, like so many other places right now.
Yes, that's actually the case. So many Iranians are asking the legitimacy of the UN, as well as UN-related bodies, human rights bodies, as well as ICC and others, because they have always failed to bring justice to this terrorist cult. But let's remember that when the UN and its related bodies, they fail such expectations, then they leave no other choice for Iranians to, go for some way to, materialize their rights. What matters now is that because, as I said, Raisi is coming to office, now there is growing pressure from the West, from side of the Western countries, the Europeans, in order to pressure Tehran, including for human rights, and they have no better means apparently than supporting a terrorist group like MKO, claiming that they are on the run for human rights violations. That's been what they've been telling European people when they intended to relocate them from the Ashraf camp in Diyala, northern Iraq, to somewhere in Europe. All the world countries shunned the United States' request for accommodating this terrorist group and giving them a territory somewhere to erect their camp.
So that shows that they know. That shows that then. Sorry to interrupt you. Then that shows that they know what type of group it is, but yet and they continue to support it, right, Mustafa?
Of course, that's the case. Otherwise, why should have they been in the blacklist of the EU, the UK, and the United States up until 2012? They have the blood of even European and Americans on their hands. They have the blood of Iraqi Kurds and Shiites on their hands. It's not just the Iranian people. But when they when they relocated them to Albania, they told Albanians, the people, that this is a political opposition of the Islamic Republic on the run because they are afraid of the Islamic Republic. But after they started operations in their camps and they appeared with guns
in that camp on Albanian territory. And when they started money laundering and many, bribery and extortion, and they started threatening journalists and senior journalists and news directors and media people in Albania, I know for sure at least a couple of senior Albanian news directors who are on the run from their country because they have been questioning the MKO operation on their lands.
Okay,
and now,
and I'm so sorry, Mustafa, I'm so
they have
sorry,
been
but I have
bribing-
only about a minute left. Marcus, what is it going to take when we have a situation like this, that basically these Western regimes are not really paying attention to a terrorist group like this? So doesn't it basically say to independent countries that they must strengthen themselves? I mean, if might makes right in this world, and there is no, it seems, international political option in dealing with this, isn't it basically, for example, to a country like Iran or others, that you better be as strong as you can, because otherwise they will destroy you and try to make an excuse at any point to do that? Your take, Marcus.
Quite. I have long said that Iran is a source of inspiration for other countries around the world, especially countries in geostrategic parts of the world who are pursuing an independent foreign policy, because Iran has only managed to retain its independence and sovereignty by having built up a very strong economy, by having built up a very strong military, by having created a great extent of unity amongst the Iranian people, and by Iran having exceptionally closely guarded Iranian culture and Iran's religion. So other countries around the world, if they are to prevail in the face of American and British aggression, they should look to how Iran has managed to prevail since 1979.
All right, and on that note, I'm so sorry to interrupt you, but I have to end the program. Appreciate both of you being with us. Out of London, Dr. Marcus Papadopoulos, historian and analyst, and out of Tehran, Mustafa Khoshesh, journalist and political commentator. And as always, viewers, we appreciate you being with us on another Spotlight right here at Press TV. I'm Marcia Hashimi. Hope to see you next time. Goodbye.